Hello, everybody. It's time again for the Sound Farmer podcast. Last week, I was sick. As you guys know, we had to skip it for the first time since we launched it. But I am back today, and I'm very thankful for that. I want to address real quick the people who will watch this live stream once it's over and when it's been recorded. You will not be able to engage with us in the live chat here, but you will still be able to watch this whole thing and benefit from the content. Today, we are going to be talking about vegetable gardening. We're going to be talking about 3 different methods and approaches, styles of growing your own vegetables. I have used 2 of them, and I have read, studied, and seen the third one that I'm gonna share with you. And I am, I have a bunch to say about all 3 of them. And I think that vegetable gardening is something that many people want to do, that many people feel that they can do. They might be intimidated a little bit by the thought of animals or livestock, or they are in a setting, maybe more in an urban setting, where they have a hard time to keep any animals. So I did this poll again on YouTube, and I asked what I should talk about first. I want to, now that the season is starting up in the Northern Hemisphere, I wanted to talk about some pre-planning subjects on grazing, vegetable gardening, and some other stuff. And today we're going to be talking about vegetables because more than half of you guys wanted me to talk about that first. Okay, so the 3 vegetable gardening styles and approaches that we're going to be talking about today is one, the back to Eden gardening. Then we're going to be talking about market gardening. And we're going to be talking about something that I called on the thumbnail the Holzer gardening style, which I just made that up. I just made that name up. There's not really a name like that, but I'm going to explain a little bit more at the end. That's the one we're going to be talking about last. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that at the end, what I mean with that. So if you have a vegetable garden, or if you want to grow your own vegetables, then this is for you. This is going to be interesting. And I hope that throughout the live stream a little bit, we can take some of you guys' questions as well. So why don't we start with this? If you can hear me well, I see a couple people, Wendy and Stan, have already written in the chat. Just let me know if you hear me all right. Let me know where you're at and if you are vegetable gardening and maybe some of your struggles, and we'll see if we can address those questions and thoughts throughout the live streams. Again, welcome everybody. Glad we can be here. So before I want to go into the first specific approach or method to growing vegetables, I want to share some thoughts about growing food and specifically growing vegetables before I go into one of those specific approaches. So just yesterday or 2 days ago, I made a post on all our social media platforms where I said, if you're going out to eat, you're basically outsourcing your health. And if you're cooking your own meals at home, then you are basically taking responsibility for your health. And if you're growing your own food, you're taking control of your health. And that's really how important of a role food and diet plays in our mental, physical health, which has an impact on our spiritual health as well, I believe. So, I believe that health starts in the kitchen, and the resources that we use in the kitchen, they come from somewhere. And if we can if we can grow them, then we know what it is we're using, we know what it is we're eating. Let me address vegetables some general thoughts here. There's so many debates and opinions and arguments nowadays about pros and cons, about vegetables and diets and vegan diet and carnivore diet and all that stuff. And we have the food pyramid, and we have people saying things left and right. And if you guys have watched my videos in the last few weeks, you know that I'm on a carnivore diet right now. I don't eat vegetables. And I feel really, really good, and I feel really, really great. I'm losing weight. I'm getting healthier. I have more energy, and that works great for me. I have personally a lot of serious concerns about a vegan diet, though I do not want to judge anybody who chooses that for themselves. But I do not believe that the food that is recommended to us by the governments, I do not believe that the food, or what people call food in the grocery stores, is really healthy and good for us. I really do not believe that. And I think we just have to take a look at the statistics and at how people look, and we have our answer to that. Now, vegetable growing is certainly one way that we all can grow some of our own food. And I believe if you want to have a vegan diet, I have most respect for the people who grow their own food in their backyards or on a leased garden lot or something like that. I want to address something else though in regards to vegetables, because I don't know if you are in an urban setting. I don't know if you are a homesteader and want to grow vegetables, to grow your own food, or if you're a farmer or you're thinking about, growing vegetables to sell, to earn money with that. What many people don't understand is that vegetable growing and a vegetable enterprise is among the most time-consuming tasks that you can engage in on your homestead, in your life. I just want you guys to be aware of that. If you compare many different enterprises with each other, whether it's poultry enterprises or livestock and gardening, for example, gardening by far requires the most work hours. You just need to be aware of it. Maybe it balances you out. Maybe you love doing that. Maybe it's good for your fitness, good for you mentally. You balance when you're out having your hands in the dirt, and there certainly is a beauty about that and something amazing about that. But almost all approaches to vegetable gardening take a lot of time. Okay. And there are these ideas out there that, for example, market gardening and you can take all the time out of the work because you barely have any weeds and all of that. And I think there are a lot of misconceptions there. We can talk about that more when we get into market gardening. But vegetable production in general requires a lot of time. And you can easily, become overwhelmed by it. And it's also quite physical work. Okay. So vegetable gardening can be something beautiful. Anybody knows that grandma's vegetables tasted so much better than anything you could get in the store. And it was one of these benchmarks on our farm in Sweden, where we had a little market garden and we sold a few vegetables, that whenever people came and tasted something, said, "Oh, this tastes like at grandma's house," then we knew that we were doing something right. And if you're doing it for that sake, It's amazing. It's unbelievable. Your garlic, your carrots, your strawberries, anything you grow will be so much tastier, so much more beautiful, so much more nutritious than anything you could possibly buy in the store. But I also want to say one more thing in general about vegetables. Most vegetables that we grow today or that you can buy in the store today are very, very, very modern. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Okay. That's a whole nother discussion. I do not like GMOs. That's not what I'm talking about. But there are a lot of hybrids. That's a whole nother discussion. But they have bred them a lot for looks and for size. Okay. And vegetables, how they were 100, 200 years ago, maybe even only 50 years ago, they were quite different in many ways, more nutritious, more nutrient dense, and I think also a lot healthier. Just so people are aware of that. Okay. But however, I wanted to talk about 3 different approaches to vegetable gardening. So I want to start with the vegetable gardening style that brought me and my wife into the regenerative agriculture movement. A lot of you guys have heard of Back to Eden gardening and Paul Gauci. The Back to Eden gardening documentary, I still believe, is free to watch on Vimeo and YouTube, maybe too. And that is the documentary that in 2011 brought my wife and I into regenerative agriculture. A few weeks ago, I did a live podcast here on our channel where I talked about how my faith led me to regenerative agriculture. And Paul Gauci and Back to Eden gardening was definitely a big part of that. So my wife and I and my family, my kids, we visited Paul Gauci some years ago. Okay, this is now almost 10 years ago that we got to visit him at his home in Washington up on the Olympic Peninsula. And after I had watched the Back to Eden documentary, I was blown away. And there seem to be 2 different kinds of people. Some people, they just are super critical when they watch something like that, and they right away judge a man's intention and truthfulness. And then there are people who are amazed by it and just really want to take it for what it is. And I think I'm the second one. And I never had a doubt that what Paul was doing was sincere and was amazing. And it never crossed my mind that he would that he was just trying to trick people. I mean, the whole documentary was free, and nobody earned money there. And I didn't understand people who were just criticizing him the whole time. It's very obvious that you need to adjust it to wherever you are, and you just take the principles that are the same everywhere in nature. But I wanted to check out his farm or his little homestead for myself. So we went to his farm. Here he is in his orchard digging out some potatoes. We got to take those potatoes with us to Sweden and actually planted them there. And here you can see his garden that is also featured in the documentary. And here again is another picture of us walking on the orchard. And basically the Back to Eden method is a method that focuses on heavy mulching with wood chips that come from mainly leaf and branch material. Okay, not the big log from the trees or boards or bark. It's tree branches and leaves that were chipped and layered, and you put a thin layer on your garden every year, and over time it composts in the lower layers, and it attracts and grows soil life and microorganisms, and you get a very fluffy ground full of life, a ground that holds moisture, a ground that is protected and insulated from the heat, from the cold. Heavy raindrops break on the wood chips and slowly sink into the ground. And as you can see now on the next pictures here, we tried this at home. This is my daughter as she is planting some onions into our Back to Eden garden. So you can see we moved the wood chips to the side to reach the soil at the bottom, and then we planted the onions there. And when they started to grow, we put the wood chips back over the onions, and they would grow through that. We did this with garlic a lot. Here you can see this is a Back to Eden garden, our Back to Eden garden in Sweden, where we planted garlic cloves straight into this material. We did a lot of different testings on the Back to Eden garden. We did some where we had an existing garden and we just covered it thinly, like some 3-4 inches with wood chips. But this particular spot where you can see the garlic growing right now was our orchard, and we had covered that in over a foot of wood chips, a foot and a half of wood chips. And after a couple years, it had gone down to like maybe 4 inches, turned into soil and compost underneath, and we planted straight into it. And as you can see now on the next picture, this was in our garden, but it was also in the wood chips, and we had some good results there. We focused on garlic growing a bunch in Sweden. That's what I experimented with the most, and what we did in higher quantities. It is a great product because you plant it when almost all other work on the homestead is done, late in the fall. It comes up early in the spring and can, if you sell it as fresh garlic, it can provide an income for you before anything else is starting to grow on the homestead. And you harvest it before most other vegetables are ready to be harvested. You harvest it in July. And then you can dry it. And if you dry it right and store it right, you can keep it for over half a year, sometimes up to 10 months. And you can sell it. It stores well, and you can sell it as a good product throughout the winter and generate some cash flow. It's a really, really great crop, and we had great success with the Back to Eden gardening method. Here you can see we had some Back to Eden style gardening going on here. And you can see there the wood chips are already quite composted, so to speak. So the whole idea is, everybody knows, including Paul Gauci, that you cannot grow anything in wood chips. But he never claims that. That's not what Back to Eden gardening says. Back to Eden gardening says you grow in the soil, but you protect the soil by putting a cover on it. And we choose, in Back to Eden gardening, you choose wood chips. And over time, you also feed the soil through that material. That's why it needs to be mainly leaves and thin branches, because that's where most of the nutrients are in a tree or bush. Over time, you feed the soil with that mulch as it breaks down. If you would till this and mix it into your soil, you would tie up all the nitrogen. The wood chips would do that because they tie up the nitrogen, this carbon material, so that it can break down. But if you just layer it on top, you maybe have only the first half inch or inch of the soil that gets a little bit of nitrogen drawn out. But underneath that, you will still have all the nitrogen. Now, Paul Gauci, in his garden, I'm going to go back to that real quick. Up here, you can see there are barely any wood chips visible here. He layers that material now with stuff from his chicken coop. Okay, but that's also just organic matter that's already broken down, and he layers it on there on his orchard, like you can see in the background here of this picture. There he has more bigger wood chips, and the reason for that is very simple. The reason for that is that he works with tiny little seeds in his vegetable garden, and this is one of the big cons of the Back to Eden gardening method, that when you first put wood chips on your garden, okay, like you have here where the garlic is, here, for example, it is extremely hard to work with little seeds in the setting. You cannot use a seeder. It gets stuck on all the wood chips, and it is very difficult to work with. What I have had, they recommend you that you pull the wood chips apart, and that you like kind of like you see on this picture with my daughter here. You pull the wood chips apart and you plant or seed down in the soil, and I did that with lots of seeds. And then I had birds come in and they scratched because this light fluffy material, and they wanted to find all the worms, and they covered all my seeds like 3-4 inches thick of wood chips, and nothing came up. Okay, that happened to me a few times. So there are definitely challenges with the Back to Eden method that you have to deal with, and this is one method. I get a comment here that I want to address real quick about the Back to Eden method, because I agree with that. So Gary Walsh writes, I like what wood chips do, but the input cost on the acreage that I need to do is a lot. I'm looking at rye as a cover crop instead. I will lose a year, but the labor and trucking is way less. And this is definitely true. This is actually another big con with the Back to Eden gardening method, is that it requires initially for the startup an incredible amount of wood chips, especially if you want to have a larger garden and earn some money with it. In some settings, people can get wood chips for free. And if you do, that's very good and you're very lucky. However, most people cannot get them for free. And even if you could get them for free, if you want to do it at a larger scale so you can sell vegetables, it is extremely hard logistically to handle all these wood chips. You have to really use a lot of material and spread a lot of material. I have done a lot of mistakes with the Back to Eden method, and a lot of costly mistakes. We planted a lot of asparagus and a lot of garlic, and both. We planted, I think, a few thousand asparagus plants. We planted several thousand garlic plants on beds that we established that year, and we used different ways to put them on the ground. We put newspaper, we put cardboard, we did different things on the ground. We mixed even some manure around the garlic, around the asparagus, and then we covered it in wood chips, and it did not work. We lost all of those crops and we lost those pastures. And let me tell you, another challenge with the Back to Eden method is that if you don't do the establishing of the garden right and you have weeds grow through, then all hope is lost. It is nearly impossible to get the weeds out if you get them come from underneath. You weren't able to kill the weeds at the bottom. Anything that flies in from the top is no problem, because you can just easily pull it out. But anything from underneath that you were not able to quench, so to speak, is going to be an absolute nightmare. Now, the third huge challenge with the back to Eden method is it's a no-dig method, which is very dear to my heart. You don't till the ground at all. You just layer stuff on top. It's a no-dig permaculture vegetable growing method. But you need to have very good and solid garden borders. Okay, and this is very costly and very labor intensive to establish. What are you going to use? If you're going to use logs, most of them will rot away and it's hard to find straight, pretty logs, and they are expensive too, right? I've used logs. You don't want to use pressure treated stuff, as the toxins can come out. Concrete is not very nice and it's expensive. You could go with metal borders, but as soon as you get a little bit of a bigger gardening area, the cost of this is just unbelievable. So it is very difficult to find an economic solution that works for a solid garden border. We have had years on our no-dig gardens, not just Back to Eden, but also no-dig market garden that I'm going to share about next, where we lost 2 to 3 feet of gardening space from the side of root suckers and weeds growing in from the side, and there was no way we could keep up with it. The border is possibly the most important and most challenging task on the no-dig garden approaches. Okay, you can keep borders clean, with tools, with trimmers, for example, garden grass trimmers, and turn them and cut there. But then you have to be at it every week and do things. I think if somebody finds a really good, cheap, solid, not toxic, nice looking border solution for no-dig gardenings, for no-dig gardens, for gardeners that have this issue on a bigger scale, you could potentially earn some good money there. So those are some challenges. Now, we've had good and bad results, but the bad results have been mainly when we did things wrong. Okay, and let me share again with you a picture here with the vegetables. When we establish Back to Eden gardens, I would now do it this way. Year 1, I would plant a big crop like potatoes, because they don't care really about the thick wood chips. Year 2, I would plant garlic or onions into them because they don't need as many nutrients, don't need as much nitrogen to grow. They are light feeders, and they are bigger. You don't work with tiny seeds. You can just plant them straight into the soil. Now the wood chips should have started to compost already. And then year 3, you could probably start to work with some smaller seeds. Now, because of the reason that Gary shared here, just the cost and the amount of the material that you need for a Back to Eden garden, my wife and I, who had initially started to just grow vegetables, we fairly quickly realized just the amount of time it took for that material to compost and really be able to nourish and feed the ground. That took several years. It was a very slow process. And just the amounts of mulch that we needed, we couldn't buy that. We couldn't get our hands on that. It was too expensive for us as well. So we very quickly came to livestock farming and the Joel Salatin methods of livestock farming, compost production and deep bedding with chickens, with cows and pigs. First and foremost, because we were looking for ways to produce a lot of compost ourselves. And then we saw, wow, we can use our hoop house in the wintertime, make an income there as well. We can sell eggs and have, as a byproduct, have all this compost material. And so we got into regenerative agriculture that way. And that's how we left the vegetable gardening more and more and went more and more into livestock farming. But we still did some vegetable gardening, and we slowly turned it into market gardening. I first have a couple other pictures. This was our polytunnel in Sweden where we grew cucumbers and vegetables. We grew cucumbers, we grew tomatoes, we grew bell pepper, jalapenos, all in here, and we did that back to Eden style. So, well, I don't know if you could say that. This was basically a foot of wood chips that the chickens ran on all winter long. Okay, and it obviously got down. Maybe there were like 4 inches left or something at the end of the season, or 5. And then we just pulled, made a little valley here, planted the tomatoes and other plants into the soil. Then we put back the wood chips. So you had like 4, 5, 6 inches of material covering the soil, insulating it, keeping it cool. And guys, in this greenhouse tunnel here in Sweden, we had temperatures comparable to New Mexico or Arizona all year round in Sweden. And there was never any rain. And I only watered these tomatoes 3 times a year. I've made many videos about this. And let me see here. Here you can see the result. Okay. Sure, we might have had a bigger harvest if we would have watered more, but I did so much experimenting. Okay. We had tomato plants that had roots like a soccer ball when we watered daily. They were only this deep and like a soccer ball. And if you didn't water one day, these plants, their branches and leaves would hang down. Okay? If you and I didn't like that. I didn't like the water chunkies that these plants became. So I wanted to do it differently. So we planted them very, very deep into the soil. I made a thin hole with the metal bar, planted them as deep as I could, so just a couple leaves would stick out. They would grow, and I would water them maybe 2, 3 times a season, and their roots just went down and tapped into the water. The plant was forced to look for its own water, and that way we had a great way. So even though in this greenhouse tunnel, during the daytime, there was like 100 degrees, we tried to keep it cooler, but it was hard at times. The ground was insulated with 4, 5, 6 inches of wood chips, sometimes even more. And underneath, it was still always moist and cool, which helped the plants. Okay, so we did this kind of no-dig, back to Eden method. You see all the wood chips and sawdust and everything mixed with chicken manure, then obviously from the winter deep bedding. And it worked pretty well. Then we went to something called market gardening. We had a tiny market garden in Sweden, and here you see the results of the 1 year we really tried to pursue this more. Here you see some lettuce, you see some garlic. Okay, I have another picture of some other lettuce as well. And basically the idea here is this is a no-dig market garden. Okay, I'm going to explain more in a second, but the idea in a no-dig market garden is similar to the back to Eden gardening method. It's also no-till. You don't till it at all. You don't turn it at all. You just layer the beds with material, but you use already composted material to put on the gardening beds. You don't use raw wood chips. You use already composted material. And then you optimize your garden by having the same bed width and same bed length for calculation. This is a market garden that I consulted with my client in on the previous farm we were at here in Austria. This was actually a slope, and I planted this terrace for him. And then we established 4 of these terraces. You have one here. It's hard to see now. One here, and then there are 2 more up there, and another big one at a different place at the farm. And all these garden beds are the same width, and there are tools that fit these width. Okay. All those tools, the rakes, the seeders, the broad forks, everything just fits perfectly with this width. And the market gardening is meant to really be a small scale, hand powered form of vegetable production. Now, market garden doesn't say anything about whether it's till or no till. It just talks about this style of gardening beds and this kind of vegetable growing. Okay. There are light till methods for market gardening. There are no till methods for market gardening. And you can look into all of that. We lack the time now to look into that or to talk about that more. But the only method I personally have ever pursued, the method that you also see here on this picture that we did in Sweden, is the no dig market gardening method, where you grow, it's intensive crop growing. You have very small spacing between the rows and between the plants, and you grow a lot of vegetables. Basically, the same day you harvest one crop, the next crop gets planted already, and it's a big yields on small space in regards to vegetable gardening. Now, it also requires an insane amount of compost, especially during establishment. Here you can see me establish a market garden here in Austria. We built these frames and we filled them. This is 5 to 6 inches of compost for each of these beds. Very costly, very high input at first. You can put cardboard down, you can put newspaper down, you can till the ground first and then establish them. In my experience, you need to establish these in the fall. If you do this in the spring, the chances of weeds growing through them is just so much higher. It's super difficult to establish these in the spring without having lots of weeds come through. But here you see a picture of me holding some of the compost that we produce with our livestock. You can actually see a little pig on the right side of the picture there, black pig. The pig stuck through our cattle's deep bedding and produced this compost. And that was the only way we could come up with material. And even then, we didn't have enough compost to establish big spaces of garden. It is a tremendous input. And the 2 market gardens that I helped establish here in Austria, we bought in all the compost for the establishment. And guys, let's not kid around. We do not know what all is in that compost. You can trust what the producer says. You can hope for the best, but at the end of the day, you do not know where that stuff came from and what's in there. You just don't. That's a big con. The cost, the labor that goes into establishing these is insane. Okay. The amounts you need for this. Now, it's a great method for those people who do this, for the people who work with it. It's amazing. It's something so beautiful to see a market garden. to see this small scale intensive vegetable gardening. It's absolutely beautiful to see when you drive by, when you look at it from a distance, when you see an aerial shot from above with a drone or something. I love that aspect of it, but it's extremely labor intensive to establish. You have to source a ton of material, a ton of compost, and most of the time then you do not know what is in that compost. And the same thing here, if you do something wrong when you establish it and the weeds grow through from the bottom, it's like nearly impossible to get a grip on it after. And if you don't have a good border on your garden, plants will grow in from the side a ton. And so the pros of the no-dig market gardening is it is a way to grow vegetables on a small scale without big, heavy equipment. It is very nature friendly, so to speak. You're working in a permaculture setting. You have amazing water holding capacity. You have, a very organized way of really planning out vegetables, and you can grow a lot on small space. But remember, the thing I started this video with is that vegetable gardening, out of all enterprises you could choose on the farm, is the most labor intensive. Now, if you can source compost cheap, if you can maybe produce it cheap, then vegetable gardening might be an enterprise that has the least initial startup cost, the smallest initial investment for you. You don't have to buy livestock. All you have to buy is some seeds. You just buy some hand tools, okay? If you can get your hands on some affordable compost, you might be able to start that enterprise without having a lot of financial means currently. But it'll require a lot more of your time, a lot more effort, a lot more work hours than, let's say, pastured broilers, pastured eggs, pastured pork, cattle needs in that sense. Okay, so just so that you're aware of that. Now, I have worked quite a bit with both Back to Eden gardening and the Nordic market garden. I've established 3 or 4 different market gardens by now. We've learned things each time, things you have to pay attention to, the season, the material, what you do to the ground, and so on. And I have come to the conclusion for our family personally that if we will do vegetable gardens in the States, only very small limited space will be Back to Eden or Nordic market garden. And the reason for that is just that to keep those pretty and weed-free and tidy, it requires just so much time. Okay? And that's why I want to talk about the third method of gardening, the third approach, which I want to experiment with when we come to the States, when we have our own land. Now, this is something that I've heard 2 people share about this. One person here in Europe, one person in the States. I've read this from them in their books as well. And the person here in Austria is Sepp Holzer. I lived and worked with, I lived on his son's farm. He took over his father's farm, and I've lived there and I've worked there with him. But it is his father that I've never met, Sepp Holzer, who describes this in one of his books. And then in the United States, it's Gabe Brown. Gabe Brown is a very well-known regenerative farmer and holistic manager. He is known for his book Dirt to Soil, and he also does something similar. So here's basically what these two guys have done. They have taken a piece of their land, and what Sepp Holzer did and described in his book is he had a herd of pigs or a group of pigs. He spread out some grain, some feed on that land, and when you throw that feed onto the ground, you stimulate the pig to really root and dig. Okay, especially if you soak the feed first, this juice and liquid that now smells tasty to the pig. It sinks a little bit into the ground, and if you feed pigs on the ground and not in a trough, then they really start digging where you throw the feed. So let's say you take a piece of land, and he spread this feed there, maybe not all at once, but as much as they would eat every day. And he encouraged the pigs to root, and he basically had the pigs do a light surface till, so to speak, of that area by stimulating them with the feed. And they would root, they would eat out all the potential harmful bugs. The moles and voles, they would also disappear from them rooting. They would eat out the roots and weeds, most of them. And there's a sweet spot, and I can't tell you now exactly where that is, because that also depends on the climate and the health of the land where you would do this on. But basically, he did a light till with his pigs, then he moved them on. Right when the pigs were moved off of the land, Sepp Holzer would come with a bowl full of vegetable seeds, a mixture of plants, lettuces, and all kinds of like legumes and all different kinds of plants that he put some time and effort into studying what plants work well together and everything, but also trusting that nature would sort that out. And because this was a quite big piece of land, he wasn't worried about if one or the other wouldn't turn out well. And so he went and he just spread all the seed, scattered it over this area. And I can't remember, I think at some point he did this also in the forest to reforest parts of his land. He did this with seeds for trees, but he also did it with vegetables. And I think in the forest system, he even let the pigs on there a little bit after, so they would cover the seeds a little more. But in the vegetable settings, he would let this grow up, and all of a sudden you have thousands of plants growing up in a polyculture setting, okay, where they would grow and all of a sudden create symbiosis with each other. They would help each other, and however they would be able to help and benefit from each other, that's just how all these vegetables would grow up. Some would fail, some would be eaten by the birds, but some would really work well together. I saw earlier a comment about the Three Sisters, which is an approach where you plant corn and squash and some legume. The corn grows up high, the legume grows up on it, the bean or pea, and then the squash covers the ground. And much like you try to take advantage of the benefits of these different kinds of plants in that approach, what Sepp Holzer did here, where he spread out all these mixtures of vegetable seeds, as he described in his book, these plants would grow up lots, and generally the more the better, right? The more varieties, the better. And so you can imagine how that looks. This doesn't look like a nice, tidy picture book kind of market garden style, but it is all of a sudden a field with life, abundant things grow, and you will not have this perfect shaped lettuce head probably. But he could go there and he could walk through there and he could pick whatever he wanted. If something didn't look too good, well, great, then he left it there for nature. But he had plenty to choose from. Now, Gabe Brown, in his book Dirt to Soil, he described something similar. He just seeded with his direct seeding drill for his tractor, I believe. He seeded this mixture of a huge variety of vegetables, and he chokes in his book and says that it came up in this mixture and in this polyculture, and whatever he stepped on a given evening, that's what they ate for dinner. Now, that is something I want to experiment with. I want to try that out more soon as we get our hands on some land in the States. And I want to share with you guys real quick what I really like about that approach. One thing I personally love about nature is that nature works with such an incredible abundance. I mean, there are so many berries, right? Not just so many different kinds of berries, but on one bush, so many berries, for example, that you couldn't possibly eat all of them. There's always enough for the insects and for the birds. And there is organized chaos in nature, right? There's nobody who makes these square market garden beds, so to speak, but nature grows so many things in such a beautiful way, but it's not organized by a human. So what I like about this approach is that, first of all, you don't have to work hard to get a garden border. Okay, you don't have to work hard to try to keep weeds out. You don't have to spend hours a day making sure the straight border looks straight and is nice, because there is no straight border, so it can't look ugly. And so you have such an abundance on that field that who cares if half of it or even 80% of it is something that most people wouldn't buy, because you have such an abundance that even if a deer comes or a slug comes or whatever, there's still so many others to choose from that you will have something for yourself to eat. And you can choose things from that. And so you use the animals as a tool to help you. And it doesn't require you to establish so much stuff. It doesn't require you to buy in loads and loads of wood chips or of compost and to haul them around with a front end loader or a different kind of machine. It's something that with some seeds, if you ideally can harvest them yourself and grow your own seeds for the next year, that's more affordable for sure. And then it requires the pigs, and you grow pork doing this, and you grow vegetables doing this, and you work with nature doing this. And once you've harvested the vegetables that you want, what Sepp Holzer did is he had the pigs return to that place and eat all the remaining vegetables. Okay. Now, let me tell you, I don't believe this is easy. I believe this would take several years and several different spots to practice and learn on to really get it right. How long do you put the pigs on there? If the soil was really in a bad place, you need to try to, see which seeds do you put there. If the ground was depleted, do you have to add anything? You have to work with the weather conditions. It would definitely take some effort and trial and error, testing back and forth. But there are people who are doing this. There are people who have done it. And it's just a very, very interesting approach that I would really like to try for myself when we have our own land again in the States. So, my experience with any kind of organized vegetable gardening is that I am not really the right guy for that. Other people are, and that is completely fine. I can easily get overwhelmed with that and keeping it nice and tidy. And if I get overwhelmed and something else happens and you lose a week of not tending to the garden, then it just gets ahead of you. And it can easily just cause a tremendous amount of stress. That has been my experience. So um, yeah, I I'm looking forward to experimenting with that and sharing all of that on YouTube again. Okay, guys, let's check out a couple more questions here before we head into um, before we end up before we end the live stream. I'm sorry. Let's see here. Somebody said I do rabbit colonies for the manure. It's amazing. That's great. Love it. Yeah, if you guys have some questions right now about any of these vegetable gardening methods, please ask me. Yeah, third way sounds like a plan. Somebody says, yeah, I hope so. I'm looking forward to trying it. I'm on a carnivore diet now, like I said, so I don't eat vegetables, and I'm feeling great. But my family still eats, and I will go back to fruit vegetables like cucumber, tomato, all that stuff. And that's we want to grow that for sure. And I'm really looking forward to experimenting a little bit with it. Well, if there are no more questions, I want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. It's a really interesting discussion. Most likely, in a week from now, I'm going to be talking about grazing and planning your grazing on your homestead or your farm. Now, I don't care if you have just a few goats or if you have 200 head of cattle, if you have a milk cow, if you have some grass that you manage, then please tune into that live stream. You will be learning a lot from that. Um, that is a resource that is so incredibly important to manage because um, as long as you have sunlight and rain that's free, you can grow that and you can turn that into amazing products. If you manage this resource right, if you plan this the correct way, it can have huge economical and quality of life um, impact on your life. So thank you guys. Okay, there's one question here. What storage crops do you focus on putting back from winter? I'm focusing on potato and winter squash big this year. Yeah, those are definitely two that are great. Like I shared earlier, also garlic and onion you can store at room temperature for many, many months. That's a really great way. You can turn certain vegetables, if you ferment them, kind of like sauerkraut, they can store for a very long time. I mean, all these delicacies that we have today, these hams and these fermented things, that they are all results of people trying to store things for a long time, and they are healthy as well. So that's a really good thing. I mean, we love potatoes. If you eat carbs, I personally think potatoes are one of the best carbs you can have there. So yeah, all of you guys mentioning in the live chat that you're waiting for us to come to the States, we're waiting too. We should hear back from the National Visa Center about my appointment for the physical exam and for the interview at the American Embassy in the next couple of weeks here. So you can be praying for that. We're hoping that we'll get some good suggestions in the near future for when we can go there. And it's a very big trip for us. It's like 5-6 hours away from here. So we'll have to see how that works out. But yeah, our hope is still that maybe summer, latest fall, we can be in the States. Okay, guys, thank you. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye bye.